Hello everybody, this is Gareth Cahoon Speaks back here with another video. I'd like you to hit the subscribe bar, give me a thumbs up if you like the video, or hit the notification bell to be notified when I post my next post. Or otherwise you can donate to my ministry and the charities that I support at garethcahoon3 at gmail.com on PayPal. This is part 2 of the previous post. With the war over the huge number of Jewish refugees, the demands to open the borders for them would have increased. Maybe Israel would get independence anyway around 1948 by force or by diplomacy. Both options are possible. The Palestinian Nakba, as they call it, which in English just simply means catastrophe. Refugees might still have had to flee, only they wouldn't be Palestinians, they would be Arabs, citizens of Arabia, fleeing from one part of the country to a different part of the country. They wouldn't be stateless refugees, but internally displaced passport holding subjects of the Arab kingdom. The multi-generational refugee crisis that fuels so much of the conflict today would not have formed. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't have been any suffering, but the legal and political reality would have been different. Israel would also look different in this scenario. Its bureaucracy and institutions, a big part and big parts of its democracy itself, are things Israelis have inherited from British rule. Would an Israel emerging from this scenario be democratic, or would we have had a King Ben Gurion scenario, or at least a much more authoritarian prime minister or president? A state's political culture tends to absorb some of the character of the empire it's in. If the whole region was a monarchy, the Jewish state might have leaned in that direction too. How about the internal Israeli racism against Jews from Arab countries? If significant numbers of Iraq and other Middle Eastern Jews had migrated earlier under stable conditions rather than arriving with nothing in the 1950s, they might have managed the Jewish autonomy's relations with the royal court during the 1920s and 30s. They would have risen to positions of power in Israeli society, and the dynamics between Ashkenazi Jews and Mizrahi Jews, which shook the country in the 1960s and 70s, would have looked very different. People look at Faisal Weizmann agreement and imagine a lost utopia. I am more sceptical. Yes, the region would have developed very differently, but I still suspect that some form of Jewish independence would eventually have emerged. Would Faisal have allowed it? This is difficult to know. He died in 1933, just as Europe was beginning to unravel under Hitler. A long-term agreement would therefore have depended on his successor. If his son Gehazi had inherited both his throne and his pragmatism, he might have concluded that granting Jewish statehood through negotiation was wiser than suppressing it by force. In a vast Arabian kingdom stretching from Kuwait to Palestine, the Jews would not have been the only minority pressing for greater autonomy. The Kurds in North Syria and Iraq would likely have posed an ever larger and more persistent challenge. Faced with multiple nationalist pressures, a pragmatic ruler might have chosen compromise in one arena to preserve stability in the others, perhaps securing guarantees over Jerusalem and the Muslim holy sites while recognising Jewish sovereignty elsewhere. So why did this not occur? Two words: Sykes-Picot. The French and British had a secret agreement from 1916 in the midst of World War I, in which they had carved up the Ottoman Empire between them. Weizmann and Faisal had not been aware of this agreement. They met and made decisions on cooperation and the future of the Middle East, unaware that their fate had already been shaped by European diplomats carving up the Ottoman map in 1916. I said that the British could have satisfied the national ambitions of both the Jews and the Arabs, but that had they done that, they would have had to break their promise to France, and France had fought with them on the front lines. In this agreement, Britain took over Palestine, Transjordan, Iraq and Kuwait. They already had Egypt, while France took Syria and Lebanon. Faisal had already established his capital in Damascus when the French army arrived and expelled him in 1920. Crushing his army, Britain gave him a consolidation prize of becoming king of Iraq, while they gave Transjordan to his brother Abdullah. Abdullah's descendants are still on the Jordanian throne, while Faisal's descendants were killed in a bloody revolution in the 1950s. In the agreements with Weizmann, Faisal had added a caveat that he was not obliged to the agreement if the Arabs did not obtain their independence from Britain, which essentially made the agreement null and void after 1920. The pragmatic Arabs like Faisal and in Jerusalem, the Nashabi clan, lost their credibility. They appeared naive for having trusted European promises and ended up with nothing. Instead, the radical elements like the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem took over the narrative, changing it from "we can work together in a shared space" to a zero-sum winner-takes-all conflict. In 1919, there was a real and honest cooperation between Jews and Arabs in the future of Palestine. It collapsed not because Jews and Arabs are eternal enemies, but because empires calculated differently. Leaders made choices and fragile agreements were overridden. Hatred is not genetic, history is not destiny. It is the accumulation of decisions, and the future depends on the decisions we make today. If an Arab prince over 100 years ago could realise that Zionism is an asset and not a threat to the Middle East, then perhaps that possibility still exists today. In fact, the Abraham Accords suggest that it does. This really shows that if Britain and France had have done things just a little bit differently and hadn't been so greedy for oil, that the Jews and the Arabs might be living beside each other now as brothers, because after all, that's what they are. Abraham had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac was the promised son. Ishmael got promises too, but only if he yielded to Isaac having control of the birthright. And that's where the Middle East conflict has started from the two sons of Abraham fighting it out amongst themselves, just like many normal brothers do in life. But this whole conflict could have been 100% different. Imagine all the bloodshed that has happened from 1918 till now. What an amazing place the Middle East could have been if not for Britain and France doing the dirty deed that they done in greediness over Arab oil. You see, Chaim Weizmann was a Jewish chemist, and in World War I, Britain was running out of enough acetone to be able to make explosives so that they could win World War I. Chaim Weizmann was a chemist, and Lord Balfour and the Prime Minister of the time went to him and asked him could he make enough acetone to supply the British Army. And he said, well, I don't know if I can do it, but I'll try. Try he did, and try he succeeded. And then Britain, under Lord Balfour, asked him what we could do to repay him for such a wonderful gift that they gave the British Empire. And he said, simply, sir, give my people Israel their national homeland. And then the Balfour Declaration was declared. But after that happened, Britain turned its back on the Jews and sided with the Arabs because of oil. This is the history of the Middle East that not many know, and now you know it. Shalom, Maranatha.